Our first major topic today is diet and nutritional needs. So in the context of what we need in our diet, there are two components to consider. There's the right amount of stuff, and there's the right mixture of stuff. And before we go any further, I want to refer everybody to a scene from The Martian, the movie and the book. And if you haven't read the book, highly recommended. But there's a scene in the book where he talks about, he being Matt Damon's character in the movie, he's talking about kind of going through the math of what he needs to stay alive. And he goes through and he has like vitamins because they're astronauts and they're given vitamins that have like all of the basic stuff that they need. And he's going through and he's figuring, okay, I got enough of this, I got enough of that. But the thing he keeps coming up short on is the calories, having just the amount of, having just energy to survive. And that scene is really useful, I think, in terms of getting at this idea that nutrition is both the right amount of stuff and the right mixture of stuff. In the context of that scene, he had the right mixture. He had everything he needed, but he just didn't have enough of a particular thing. He didn't have enough actual calories for energy. In a different context, you could have a situation where you have enough calories, you have enough of both either just the raw amount of food or you have enough of specific things, but you're missing something from that mixture. So in order to have a complete diet that meets all of the human nutritional needs, you need to have the right amount of everything and you need to have the right mixture of stuff in that diet. The first thing that we need, of course, is chemical energy, which in our bodies we use in the form of ATP. So we need molecules to break bonds and get electrons that we can use to generate ATP. The unit that we use to measure the amount of energy in our food is a calorie with a capital C. Now the actual unit for that, the kind of SI unit for that, I don't actually know if it's an SI unit, but the standard unit for this energy is actually the kilocalorie, which is 1,000 calories with a small c. 1 kilocalorie, calorie with a capital C, is what you see like on your food nutrition labels when it says like, calories per serving. It's actually talking about the big C calories or kilocalories. So this kilocalorie is the heat required to raise 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. A small c calorie is the heat required to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So we're measuring the energy in terms of changing the temperature of some mass of water. As humans, we get our calories mostly from carbs, but also from proteins and lipids. The single molecule that is responsible for most human calories is starch. So if you think about like grains, which is the staple source of calories for most people on Earth, the molecule that we're actually using for calories in that type of food is starch. Of these energy sources, lipids are by far the most energy rich. They have about 9 kilocalories per gram. Carbs and proteins have only about 4 kilocalories per gram, which if you think about how we store energy in our body, that's what you'd expect. Lipids are the long-term storage medium in our body, and that makes sense because lipids are the most energy dense of all of these sources of food. At 9 kilocalories per gram, they get twice as much bang for your buck for every gram you store compared to carbs or proteins. So we use carbs for our short-term energy, and we use lipids, much more energy dense, for our long-term energy. The energy that we need only tells part of the story. We also need to make specific things. One of the things we need to take in so we could build other molecules is organic building blocks. And there are 2 types of organic precursors that we need to ingest. The first is a source of organic carbon because remember, we're heterotrophs, so we can't do carbon fixation. We can't take in CO2 and convert it into glucose or G3P or whatever else we need. So we need to ingest organic carbon, like this molecule right here, which we can then convert into other forms as needed. Along the same lines, we need a source of nitrogen because even though we're constantly inhaling nitrogen gas in the form of N2 from the atmosphere, we're not able to do nitrogen fixation either. So we need to get organic nitrogen, like the amino group in this amino acid right here, so that we can take that organic nitrogen and incorporate it into other things as needed. Again, for both of these requirements, we can't take the raw materials that are just out in the atmosphere, CO2 and nitrogen gas, and convert them into organic forms. Other organisms can do that, and then we need to ingest those organic forms to be able to work with them within our own cells. The big thing here is that both carbon and nitrogen are going to be required to make other macromolecules that we need. The third class of stuff in our diet that we need is called essential nutrients. These are things that we can't make for ourselves and therefore must be ingested. And there's a lot of different types of essential nutrients, so we're going to spend the rest of the time in this section right here talking about all of these different things that we need and why we need them. The first thing I want to talk about is how carbs are not an essential nutrient. We use carbs as our main source of calories, but there's nothing about carbohydrates that we can't make for ourselves. We can make any carbohydrates we need in our cells, so we don't have to take in any specific carbohydrates from our food in order to get all the carbs that we need. We're perfectly capable of getting enough energy from other sources like lipids and proteins, and we can make whatever carbohydrates we need via the biochemical processes in our cell. Now, we're not going to make these via photosynthesis, right? We can't do photosynthesis. But given a source of organic carbon, we're able to make whatever we need. We can see some of these pathways in this poster here, and don't worry, you are not responsible for any of this. I just want to show you this poster as an example of both how complex cells are and just how little of the biochemistry of a cell we're covering in Gen Bio. So this is a big overview of cellular biochemistry, and we can zoom into just a little bit here. And I just want to give you an idea. Right here, you could see oxaloacetate, which should be familiar to everybody, because remember, that is part of what? Yeah, the citric acid cycle. So we have oxaloacetate right here, and we have lots of ways, lots of different pathways that are capable of feeding in to make oxaloacetate. And the same is true for every part of this cycle. So we treat things like glycolysis and the citric acid cycle as the New Jersey Turnpike, right? You go in and you're stuck and you got to go through all the steps and then you hit the exit ramp. And if you miss the exit ramp, too bad, you're stuck for another 8 miles. In reality, the biochemical pathways in the cells are like Route 1. There's an in and an out every couple of meters, and you could turn this driveway, you can go down that side street, you stop at this traffic light and go that way. You're constantly moving molecules in and out, and we're able to do that for all the carbohydrates that we need, so we don't need to take in any specific carbohydrates. On the other hand, there are amino acids that we cannot make for ourselves, and these are called essential amino acids. In order to make all the proteins that you need 20 amino acids. You need all 20 different amino acids. Most animals make about half of them, and in order to do this, you need organic nitrogen, and you also need a source of sulfur because 2 of the amino acids do include sulfur. The rest have to be ingested from our food because we can't make them ourselves. In humans, there are 8 essential amino acids in adults and 9 in infants. Don't worry, you don't have to know what the 8 or the 9 are. It doesn't matter. Just know that there's a bunch that we can't make for ourselves, 8 of them in adults. This means that we have to get our amino acids from our food. Now, we can divide our food roughly into 2 sources based on how many amino acids are present. Foods that we call complete proteins, things like meat, cheese, and eggs, generally animal products, those contain all of the amino acids. So you get all the essential amino acids you need from some animal-based food source. Incomplete proteins, generally plant sources, are usually missing 1 or more amino acids. So if you're eating a specific type of bean, you're not going to get all 20 amino acids. You need to also eat some other type of plant food source in order to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. So this can be a challenge for vegetarians because as a vegetarian, if you're not eating animal products, and in particular as a vegan, if you're not eating any animal products, you have to be very cognizant of the amino acid content of each thing you eat to make sure you don't accidentally cause an amino acid deficiency by consuming only incomplete proteins and missing one of the essential amino acids. There are also essential fatty acids. For the most part, we can synthesize the fatty acids we need, but one thing that our cells have trouble with is double bonds. So there are certain molecules that have certain double bond configurations that we cannot make ourselves. This means that we take in essential fatty acids with the specific double bonds in the places we need, and then we can further modify from there to make the specific molecules that our bodies require. Some examples of this are linoleic and linolenic acid, and you're not going to have to memorize those. We're never going to give you a question where it's like, which of the following is an essential fatty acid? That won't happen. But just to give you some examples, linoleic and linolenic acid are both polyunsaturated fatty acids, and in the case of linoleic acid, it gets converted into things like phospholipids and prostaglandins, both of which we've talked about extensively at this point. Deficiencies of essential fatty acids are extremely rare. We find them in seeds, in grains, in vegetables. So most people, even people with a relatively restricted diet, have no problem ingesting all of the essential fatty acids that are required. Our next class of essential nutrients is the vitamins. These are organic compounds that you require in extremely small amounts. Many of these are coenzymes, so they're required for this or that specific enzyme to function properly. And there are 13 molecules that we call vitamins in humans. 12 of them we cannot synthesize ourselves. The 13th, vitamin D, which we'll talk about in a little bit, we actually can synthesize, but we require sunlight in order to do it, so we still consider it an essential nutrient because we require something that we can't make for ourselves in order to make it. We can divide the vitamins into two categories. There's water-soluble vitamins and lipid-soluble vitamins. Now, the water-soluble vitamins cannot be stored in excess in your body. So if you ingest a bunch of water-soluble vitamin, they get excreted in your urine. And this is why most vitamin supplements, particularly those that have lots of excess vitamin beyond the recommended daily value that you need, are a complete waste of money. In general, in a modern diet in the United States, vitamin deficiencies are quite rare. In general, people are ingesting whatever vitamins they need from their food. And again, you don't need very much. And I'll give you in a few minutes, I'll give you an example of just how little of some of this stuff we need. So taking a multivitamin that has 100% of this and 150% of that, and some of them are well in excess of that, all you're doing is making really expensive urine. Vitamin C is a good example of this, where there are vitamin C supplements that are like, oh, you're getting a cold or you're getting sick, take this vitamin C supplement. There's no evidence that that has any effect on your immune system and decreasing the severity or the duration of your cold. What you're doing if you ingest one of those big vitamin C things, all you're doing is over the next few hours peeing out a whole lot of vitamin C, and it's not actually being helpful at all to your well-being. There's a book on this that I just started. If I had started the book last month, I'd have a lot more to say on this topic. But the book is called Vitamania, and it's about this dietary supplement shady industry and all stuff about how basically it's a big scam. The whole industry is basically a giant scam. And for most people, you don't need to supplement your diet with specific vitamins, and in particular water-soluble vitamins, because you're just peeing it out anyway. It's not even being absorbed in your body. So that's my soapbox rant on vitamins and supplements. Basically, be careful, be an informed consumer, and don't believe anything you hear from a supplement company, because most of it is not actually doing anything physiologically. And that's really the best case scenario, that it actually doesn't do anything. Most supplements aren't going to do anything, and that's good. If they do something, then that's a problem, because none of that stuff has been evaluated as safe by the FDA or what kind of drug interactions it has. So just be careful with that whole stuff. It's shady and mostly just a scam. So that's my rant on vitamins. I wish I could have done that in person, but oh well, here we are. So anyway, water-soluble vitamins, you cannot store them in excess, which means they're excreted in your urine if you have more than you need. So let's talk about those. The first are the B-complex vitamins, and there's, I think, 8 B-complex vitamins. A couple important ones are vitamin B3, which is also called niacin. This is an important component of NAD+ and NADH. So you need this for energy transport, energy transformations in your cells. And then vitamin B9, folic acid. This is really important for neural tube development, neurulation. Deficiencies in folic acid during embryonic development lead to neural tube defects, which we've talked about before, so things like spina bifida. For that reason, During pregnancy, vitamin B9 will be supplemented. It's like the only thing that, as long as you have a balanced diet, you're generally getting all your vitamins, and a doctor may recommend like a multivitamin. But the big thing is get enough vitamin B9 to prevent neural tube defects. In adults, a deficiency of B9 can lead to anemia. So it's also important for adults, but we tend to think of it in the context of embryonic development. The next vitamin is vitamin C, sorbic acid. This is important for a lot of things. So it's important for collagen synthesis. It's involved in connective tissue, and in particular the tissue that's like kind of below your skin, holding kind of all the layers together. It's an antioxidant, and it improves iron absorption, which is important for circulating oxygen. Now, why am I showing you a picture of a pirate here? Because what is the result of a vitamin C deficiency? Yeah, exactly. It's scurvy, which is typically associated with like sailing, before we realized exactly what was causing it. And pirates, who are not known for their healthy diets and hygiene, were particularly susceptible to scurvy. So scurvy is the result of vitamin C deficiency. It results in the degeneration of the skin, the teeth, blood vessels. So you have problems with connective tissue. The skin kind of hangs off and your eyes get like sunken. It results in weakness. Impaired immunity and healing is also a symptom. So like injuries like cuts and scrapes will not heal well. You can have problems with bleeding, often around like the gums and the teeth. And this was a major problem until we figured out that vitamin C, which is commonly found in citrus fruits, is the problem here. So an example of this is on Magellan's round-the-world voyage, the first circumnavigation of the globe, which Magellan didn't complete because he got killed in the Philippines because he was an idiot. And there was a book on this called Over the Edge of the World. It's a really good book, and I recommend to everybody. But a lot of people on that voyage died of scurvy. Magellan and the higher-ups on the voyage did not, because they had some apricot jam with them, and that was theirs. It was like a luxury food, and that had enough vitamin C in it to keep them healthy. You don't need a lot of vitamin C every day. The amount of vitamin C required to be healthy can be found in a single packet of ketchup from like McDonald's. That contains all the vitamin C you need for the day. So it's not something we need a lot of, but it's really important to get it, because otherwise you end up looking like this guy, who is, anyone get it? Yeah, this is Blackbeard. And the reason I'm showing Blackbeard is because you could see like the kind of the sallow skin, the eyes sunken in. That really exemplifies some of the symptoms of scurvy. Also, a funny historical note here, his hair appears to be on fire. That is not artistic license. He would actually put slow-burning matches in his hair when he was going into battle and light them on fire. So, and then they would like attack merchant ships at night. So imagine being woken up in the middle of the night, sleeping on the deck of a ship, being woken up in the middle of the night by someone waving swords and pistols at you with their head on fire. That's how Blackbeard would operate as a pirate. So fun fact for you, that's Blackbeard. And yes, he's got matches in his hair. That's historically accurate. You're welcome. The second class of vitamins are called fat-soluble vitamins. These are vitamins that can be stored in the body long term. The first of these we'll talk about is vitamin A, which is retinol. This is important for vision because it is converted to retinal with an A, and that is a component of rhodopsin, which we've talked about previously as the photosensitive receptor in your eyes. So a severe deficiency of vitamin A can lead to blindness. And then there's vitamin D, which we are actually capable of synthesizing ourselves. However, we still consider this an essential nutrient because we can't do it independently. We need to be exposed to UV light. So typically we're talking about sunlight here. The rule of thumb for vitamin D is you need to be exposed to 30 minutes of sunlight twice a week in order to trigger the synthesis of all of the vitamin D you need. This is important because it promotes calcium absorption in your intestines. And calcium is important for what thing that we've already talked about? Well, okay, it's important for a lot of things, but skeletons is what I was going for. So a deficiency in vitamin D can lead to rickets or osteomalacia. They're actually the same thing, but rickets is the childhood version. Osteomalacia is the adult version. But basically, it's a weakening of the matrix of the bones due to a calcium deficiency, which itself is due to a vitamin D deficiency, and that can lead to the large weight-bearing bones of the body bending. So here's an example of a child suffering from rickets. You can see the femurs here are actually bent. It's because as they are bearing weight, those bones are actually flexing and bending, which, as you probably know, bones should not be doing. So the solution here is to ingest enough calcium and also get enough UV light to make enough vitamin D. Fortunately, this is not really a problem anymore because we put vitamin D in our food. We've talked about this before in the context of iodine and thyroid hormone, where iodine deficiency basically isn't a thing anymore because we put iodine in our salt. We put vitamin D in our milk and milk substitute products, so you'll see on, if you ever look at either milk or almond milk or oat milk or whatever white liquid of choice that you prefer, if you look at the ingredients on that, it will say vitamin D in there because we supplement that stuff with vitamin D to make sure that our population does not have any vitamin D deficiency. And that's a really effective public health intervention. It's one of those very low-cost, high-reward interventions that have really just solved a whole class of problems. I do want to say, though, that there is modern research that says how the sunlight itself is really important, and the vitamin D we can get from anywhere, but the sunlight itself actually has its own positive effects, that even if you're supplementing with vitamin D, you still need to get that sunlight every day because that is important for health as well. So make sure you're getting your sunlight. If you're doing it now, you are practicing proper social distancing and also wearing a mask. And the last vitamin we'll talk about is vitamin K. Vitamin K is really interesting. It's required for blood clotting, which is a process we're going to talk about more down the road. Basically, it's necessary for part of this cascade of signaling that triggers blood clotting. The primary source of vitamin K is actually not our diet. We get it from E. coli that live in our large intestine. So these are actually mutualist bacteria. They make vitamin K and they secrete a little bit of it, and then we absorb the vitamin K that they secrete. There's an interesting side effect to vitamin K acquisition via bacteria in our large intestine. And it's that we can kill them with antibiotics accidentally. So if you're being treated for an infection with antibiotics for like a week or two, that might kill the E. coli in your large intestine that are synthesizing vitamin K, and that can lead to a temporary vitamin K deficiency. Now, once you stop the treatment with antibiotics, those bacteria, they'll come right back and the deficiency will go away, but you can induce a temporary deficiency through antibiotic treatment. The final class of essential nutrients that we'll talk about is minerals. Minerals, unlike vitamins, are inorganic nutrients. And we break them into two groups. There are major minerals and trace elements, which we sometimes call macronutrients and micronutrients. And it's just based on how much we need every day. The trace elements, or micronutrients, are things that we require less than 200 milligrams of per day. So these are things that we require in very small amounts. Two very important trace elements are iron, which we need for hemoglobin, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we talk about circulation, and also cytochromes, which we've seen in the electron transport chain. Another very important trace element is iodine, which we have talked about previously in the context of the thyroid hormone. So again, these are trace elements, things we need less than 200 milligrams a day of. The major minerals or macronutrients are things that we require more than 200 milligrams per day of. If you've ever watched Breaking Bad, there's a great scene, it's a cold open for one of the episodes, where they're going through on a chalkboard all the major things that are in a human body, and they start with oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen, the big four, and then they get into a bunch of other ones, and that list is basically the major minerals. And these are all things that we've talked about already, so you could probably guess exactly what's going to be on this slide here. So we're going to go through this. We're going to see what each major mineral is and why it matters, but there's nothing new on this slide except the heading, major mineral, 200 milligram per day. Everything else on this slide we've all seen before. We're just providing a context for what we call that class of stuff. So what are the major minerals? I'm pretending this is a call and response thing, so call out some major minerals that we need. Yeah, excellent. Calcium. We've talked about calcium a lot. We need calcium for our bones, our teeth. As we'll see, it's important for blood clotting. And then we've talked about calcium in the context of synapses and muscles. What else? What other ones do we need? Okay, great. Phosphorus. Phosphorus is a big one. We need that for our nucleic acids, our DNA and RNA, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We need a lot of phosphate for that. And of course, phospholipids. It's in the name. And we've also talked about phosphate in the context of our calcium phosphate matrix for bones and teeth. What else? We've got calcium, we've got phosphorus. What are the other big ones? Okay, potassium and sodium. Right, they go together. So we talked about them for action potentials and the sodium-potassium pump, and they do a whole lot of other stuff, including just like regulating the ionic balance of the body. What else? What other ions do we need? Think ions. Okay, great. Chlorine. That's another good one. So that's the principal negative ion in the body. So this is going to be found in nerves. Because remember, it's an inhibitory signal. It's going to hyperpolarize that membrane, but it's also really important for water balance. And as we saw, it's important for digestion because we have hydrochloric acid in the stomach. There is one more here that we haven't specifically talked about in Gen Bio, but if you're in Bio Lab and you've done PCR, you've definitely encountered this major mineral. And it is, anyone have it? Very nice. It is magnesium. Do you like how we're doing this kind of Blue's Clues thing here? This is good. If you don't know what Blue's Clues is, don't worry about it. So, or maybe Dora the Explorer is a bet. Maybe you'll know that one. Anyway, we're doing this colon response thing, pretending. It's good. So, magnesium is important because it's an enzyme cofactor. So you need this for lots of enzymes in the body to work, including DNA polymerase that you use for PCR. We also need magnesium in our muscles and our nerves, but we didn't really specifically talk about it in those contexts. We did mention it in the context of synapses very briefly, but I wouldn't expect you to have made that connection over to this slide. So magnesium is our last major mineral, and those are the things we need in quantities greater than 200 milligrams per day. So to summarize our dietary needs, we talked about three things. We talked about the need for energy in the form of calories. We need our building blocks, carbon and nitrogen, and we need the essential nutrients that we can't make for ourselves. None of those are carbohydrates, but we do have essential amino acids and fatty acids. And then we talked about vitamins and minerals as our other classes of essential nutrients. And the last thing we're going to talk about here is the food pyramid, which is terrible. And I want you to think about why this is terrible. So there's a few things here. Now, first of all, this is from I forget if this was from the late 80s or the early 90s, but this is like the thing that I had in elementary school and middle school in the 90s. This is like what we were told was a healthy diet, which is so bad. It's so bad. So the reason why this exists is that we were coming out of 70s and 80s, we're seeing the obesity problem start to be a thing in the United States. So the idea is that fat is bad because that leads to a bunch of health problems. Well, what type of food is low in fat? Ooh, carbs are low in fat, therefore carbs are good. So eat a lot of carbs, that's a healthy diet. So you can see down here, 6 to 11 servings of carbohydrates per day because carbs are low in fat, and fat is bad, therefore carbs are good. But what happens if you eat more calories than you need? What do those excess carbs get converted into? Yeah, they get converted into fat. So a little bit of an oops on that one, huh? One other problem with this is what is required in carbohydrates. What do we get out of carbohydrates that we actually need in our diet? Yeah, nothing. There's no essential nutrients that we're getting out of our carbohydrates. That's all going to come from meat, dairy, vegetables, fruit, lipids. It's all going to come from this other stuff. So in addition to being bad in terms of reducing obesity, this is also bad in terms of providing essential nutrients that we need. At the other end of the pyramid up here, we have this weird group of things. We have fats, oils, and sweets, which in addition to lacking an Oxford comma there, we have some problems. Now, sweets, fine. We know that refined sugar is bad, we want to minimize that, great. But fats and oils, those are not the same thing from a diet and nutrition standpoint. Fats and oils are very different from each other. We should not be treating those as the same thing. And additionally, there are essential fats and oils that we need. We need this stuff. So the idea here is that fat is bad, therefore minimize the amount of fat in your diet. They've since gone through several iterations of replacements. So there was the second wave of there was the second kind of iteration of the food pyramid where it had like a staircase on the side emphasizing exercise, and now they have the my plate thing, which is not how pie charts work at all, because it's like a vertical line and then it's like this, so it's not easy to read. But the best food advice, I think, comes from an author and kind of food person. I forget all the stuff he's done, but it's a guy named Michael Pollan. No, a lot of his stuff is like a little bit kind of like wooey for me, kind of new agey, but I think his food advice is really good, and this is it kind of distilled down. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants, which is basically spot on. Don't eat too much, have a diverse diet, mostly plant sources, and you'll get everything you need. So that is our dietary needs. That's why we eat what we eat and what we get out of all of it.